So my husband and I just joined the church. He was baptized as a baby, so the
Mhm.
process was a bit easier for him. I'm going to be baptized on Easter,
Mm.
but
Beautiful.
they taught us about natural family planning, and I've always been confused about how that works. Like,
Mm.
how my question is, what is the difference between using birth control and using natural family planning? How can you be open to children while also trying to avoid pregnancy?
Yes. Thank you. Liana, first of all, I just got to say, I am so happy for you and your husband, for your marriage, your beautiful marriage, and for joining the church. What a beautiful, beautiful story you guys are living. So, congratulations. And I'm so excited you're going to be baptized soon. Wow.
Thank you. We also
Amazing.
just had our second baby in January.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations. That is so wonderful. I'm so happy for you guys. So, you got two kids.
Yes.
Look at you. How beautiful. Wow. Well, listen, this is a very good question. And I think a lot of people, especially when they're just kind of discovering, the faith, especially the Catholic Church's teachings on NFP, it can seem a little confusing. So totally understandable question. And I remember when I was becoming Catholic, learning about the church's teaching on contraception was really eye-opening for me. So great question. What is the difference between using NFP to avoid having children? It sounds like you're asking versus birth control, right?
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So the first thing is the biggest difference here is that NFP works within God's natural design for the human body, and contraception is an artificial method that interferes with God's natural design. So with NFP, you're using the design of your body, your fertility as a woman. You're only fertile a few days a month, right? And you're working within the design of your body without this artificial act that is interfering with sex, right? And
Yes.
so there's two core ways to think about what sex, God's design for sex, and the moral teaching. Like, why does the church teach this morally about birth control? Sex is designed to bring life into the world, as you know. You've had two babies, and it's designed for intimacy, right? To bond you two together. The primary purpose, though, is bringing that life into the world. So anything that we do to frustrate God's natural design, like we're having sex, we may be fertile, right? But we are using a condom or birth control pill to prevent that fertility from really, having the potential of bringing life into the world, right? Actually conceiving a baby, that goes against God's moral law, the natural law. But if you are not having sex, right? There's no sort of command that says you have to have sex every single time you're fertile. Like there's no sort of moral law that says you're married, you have to have sex every time you're fertile. Obviously, for many different reasons, a couple may not have sex when they're fertile or when they're not fertile. Like that's, the command is to love each other, right? And sometimes loving each other means avoiding sex because maybe someone is sick or, there's all kinds of other, dynamics, right? So sex is beautiful and good, but not having sex is part of God's plan. Obviously, most of the time when you're married, you're not having sex. You're living your lives. It's, you're doing your stuff. But it's when you frustrate the sexual act by putting contraception on it, that goes against God's plan. So that's the really simplest way to think about this is birth control is artificial. It's frustrating God's natural design, but then just abstaining from sex is perfectly moral and natural. Couples do that all the time, or they choose to be intimate, right? And so is that making sense?
That makes a lot of sense. My sister just asked me what the difference was yesterday, so I'm so glad I have all of these points now.
Amazing. Amazing. And one other thing to think about too is when you're practicing NFP, and that means you're aware of each other's bodies and understanding prudentially, you're making decisions based on a lot of conversation and prayer about your family. Like, hey, we'd love to have another child right now. We really want to maybe try for a child when we're fertile. Or maybe there's a grave reason, maybe a medical reason, right? There's a grave reason to say, hey, maybe we should wait a few months before trying for a baby or, having sex when we're fertile. That's the beauty of God's design, right? In that there's a part of our fertility cycle as women when we're not fertile. It's actually the majority of our fertility cycle is when we're not fertile. And so we can avoid having intercourse when we are fertile if we have a grave reason to delay having a child or space children. So God did that design for a reason so that couples can, make those decisions together, with prayer. And it is a way of, naturally planning your family. So it's amazing how our faith has all of these things, these beautiful truths that it provides for us so that we can have these beautiful Christian marriages.
Yes. Can I ask you one follow-up
Please
question?
do.
So like the doctors teach us women, like my gynecologist teach us women to wait at least 18 months before trying to start having another baby for health reasons. Do you agree with that? Because personally, I don't know if I should listen to the doctors that are the same ones pushing all this birth control on women when we know that it's not good for our bodies.
It is a very good question. Birth control is definitely not good for your body. And it is really sad how a lot of doctors, not all, immediately after you deliver a baby say, "What's your birth control plan?" I mean, it's really offensive, honestly. It's really messed up that that happens in a lot of our medical system today. And there are pro-life doctors and, Catholic doctors who are really practicing the faith. They're not going to say that to you, right? But it's hard. It can be hard to find them. So I would just stick to your guns and be like, listen, I don't use contraception. I'm Catholic, so that's not happening. But then, this thing about the 18 months, I think it really depends on the individual woman, right? Obviously, I'm not a doctor and I'm not, in your medical records, I wouldn't be able to, help with that because I'm not a doctor. But I can tell you for a fact, there's a lot of pro-life, Catholic doctors who would not give that advice depending on the woman, right? So I think the cultural trend of like, don't have a baby for at least 18 months, that's what some doctors are saying. But there's other doctors who say that's not necessarily the best thing for every woman, and they wouldn't recommend that. So I think it depends on the doctor you're going to talk to. You probably would get varying advice. And I would, at the end of the day, you follow your conscience as a Catholic, right? And, if you can, finding a Catholic doctor who's aligned with your beliefs would be ideal, so they can really help you and work with you. But I wouldn't, I would take that kind of advice, especially when they're giving it, like they give it to everybody blanket, the same advice. I would take it with a grain of salt.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers all my questions.
Thank you for calling, Liana, and so happy for you. I'm so happy. I'm going to be praying for you and, just excited for you and all the beautiful things God's doing in your family. And congratulations again on your baby. And again, so happy you called and I loved getting to talk to you.
Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Liana. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.